what I'd been thinking about, what prompted this is, as many of you know, one of our friends and teachers, Jackson Mine Ram Dass, passed away a couple weeks ago. And he had practiced mindfulness, practiced Vipassana meditation, insight meditation, many, many years ago in India, around the time that he met his guru. In fact, his guru sent him to do this kind of meditation practice that we practice here. But his primary practice was of devotion to his teacher, his guru, named Karoli Baba Maharaji. And as somebody who was very close to him, I watched him and how this manifested in his life as a kind of complete faith or trust that whatever was happening in his life was somehow a teaching for him, was somehow linked to his teacher, that he could put his... and he was very self-disclosing and transparent about all his foibles and human weaknesses, and never tried to pretend to be more spiritual or noble than he was. But of course, because of that transparency and honesty about himself, he was more noble than if he had been trying to be that. So all of that, whatever obstacles, whatever difficulties, just like we all have in our everyday lives and in our meditation practice, he would basically place that in the lap of his guru. And he also, it felt like a kind of worship, but it didn't feel that he was worshiping something outside of himself. It felt like the guru was his way. He would offer his love to his teacher, and guru means teacher, and then it would sort of boomerang back to him. And that love, his teacher's teaching, in a nutshell, was love everybody and tell the truth. And that's really what he did. He loved everybody, and he told the truth about his life and his experience. His guru also said, feed people. So, yes, there was always food at his house, too. And still, some other students, disciples of Neem Karoli Baba, friends of mine in Western Massachusetts, every fall they have a bandara, a feast. It's just for everybody. They just feed everybody. Everybody comes and feasts together and does some chanting and meditation practice and just have a good time. And so I was reflecting, because very honestly, even though I have taught with Ram Dass for years and I have been around him, there have been moments when I feel some connection to his teacher, but not so many, actually. And I stare at his picture with everybody sometimes when we're doing chanting, and I just kind of waiting to see if I'll have some illumination or a wave of love come over me or something. I did have one experience. It was very strange. I'll just tell you briefly. I was in a long meditation retreat in Massachusetts, where I used to live, and I liked to practice outside. So even though it was winter and there was snow on the ground, I was all bundled up and practicing by this little pond, frozen pond. And when I say practicing, I mean meditating. It's just sort of jargon that we use. I was meditating by the frozen pond, all wrapped in blankets and stuff, and I heard this really loud harmonium music, which is the instrument that accompanies the chanting called kirtan. That is the primary practice in that tradition. And there was a van way off in the distance. I thought, oh, they must have their door open. They must be playing it really loud. And then my rational mind, I thought, no, I couldn't possibly be hearing that from so far away. I'm in the woods by a pond, just for context, okay? And then, for some reason, I looked up and I saw Maharaji up in the sky laughing, and it was this very loud harmonium music. Of course, this was a complete auditory and visual hallucination. He, was gigantic in the sky, so it wasn't a real person. And anyway, he had left his body long before. And I remember thinking, because Sharon Salzberg was one of the teachers in that retreat, and she loved Neem Karoli Baba. She loved Maharaji. I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I've just slipped into Sharon's mind stream. It was an odd experience. But except for that one experience, I've never had a mystical experience with Maharaji. So I just was exploring this idea of devotion and what is devotional practice. And we don't teach that. You take classes here in mindfulness, basics of mindfulness, essentials of mindfulness, mindful self-compassion, mindfulness-based stress reduction, loving kindness practices, self-compassion. I mean, there are all these classes, but you won't see a class on devotional practice or devotion. So, and yet, as those of you who've been long-time meditators, and by long time, I'm not talking 30 years, that you've been practicing for a few years, you may notice that you feel more love and devotion in your heart. I mean, love and devotion, they're a little bit interchangeable, but devotion has some specific meanings. And so I wanted to tell you a story. This is a story of a Zen master. And Zen is what I practiced when I was young for about 15 years, pretty intensively, as much as my life would allow. I was a single mom a lot of that time and working, but I worked in schools, so I would have the same school vacations as kids, and so I could sometimes get childcare. I would trade with other single moms and go on retreats, and did that as much as I possibly could, and that was what I did whenever I had time off work and mothering. Those were my vacations. And I was honestly never drawn to Ram Dass back in those days. He was the love and light. He would dance and chant, and I was a Zen student. My dad was a scientist. It was just the opposite of a devotional path. Very clear. A lot of emphasis on clarity and stillness of the heart and mind, and so forth. And I think I was attracted to that path precisely because it didn't have religious elements or a feeling of having to worship something outside of myself. And I was a very rebellious type. I didn't like that idea. But this is a story from a Zen master who went to study in Japan in a similar frame of mind, okay? And when she mentioned this to her teacher, who was the abbot of a great Soto Zen training monastery called Sojiji, he just smiled at her and he said that the process of this training is like walking through a tunnel. But unlike a regular tunnel where you enter the tunnel and you are headed for the exit to that tunnel, and the goal is obviously to get out of the tunnel, the important thing about this practice, this meditation tunnel, is what happens to you while you're in it. That while you're in the tunnel, you're being changed and something is being transformed. And so, it does something to you while you're walking through it. And when you come out, you may find yourself different. And so he warned her and he said, it doesn't really matter. He said, imagine the tunnel has on one end Zen, or let's say Vipassana, a practice that values clarity, mindfulness, simplicity, the way that we teach and practice here. And then maybe one end is devotional practice. Maybe it's like the chanting Buddhists who chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, or Pure Land practice, or it could be like, the devotional Hindu practices that Ram Dass did. And he said it really doesn't matter which end of the tunnel you go in, because the chances are when you come out the other side, that other dimension will have been born and will then be alive in you. And I think those of us who have practiced in the more clarity-focused traditions, well, we still do loving kindness practices. We still find that our hearts are tenderized and softened, don't we? Do you notice? Yes, you're more accepting of yourself, which automatically makes you more accepting of others, which automatically makes relationships warmer and friendlier. Um, and and so it doesn't really matter where we enter these practices. We just shouldn't be surprised if we come out more devotional than we imagined ourselves to ever be. And that certainly happened to me. You just get softened. The word I always think of is tenderized, because my mom, she used to buy this meat that maybe wasn't the absolutely best, and then she'd sprinkle this meat tenderizer. I don't know what it was. I mean, now I kind of dread thinking whatever it was. It was probably just some enzyme, but anyway, she would sprinkle that all over the meat, and it would make it like more tender. Um, and so I think of that. I think, oh, I think we get tenderized in this practice, and eventually we open to just the love that's here in the universe, that's available to us, the love that is not personal, the love that we can feel when we're being with the breath, not I'm breathing, or I'm not focused, or I'm distracted, or I'm sleepy, but just breathing in and out. Maybe you had a few moments like that, did you, in your meditation, where it's just the breath, just the flow and movement of the breath, or the river of sound of traffic, or the sort of dance and play of sensations in the body. And when we're just feeling purely what it is, whatever it is, this is a kind of devotion. It's a devotion to presence. It's a devotion to the present moment, to being here. And my first teacher, Sansanim, De Sansanim, he always talked about how meditation works, and that he used to talk about correct meditation. I almost hesitate to say that because we're always worried about, am I doing it right? And I always say there's no right way. The only wrong meditation is the one you don't do at all, because you got too busy or you felt too bad or whatever. But he used to teach, he said, correct meditation is understanding your situation moment by moment. And what he meant by understanding your situation is just what you're doing. Your situation right now is listening to teachings. My situation is offering teachings. When our correct situation is, for me, is to focus completely on you and offering teachings. And yours would be to listen as attentively as you can. And mine would not be to wonder, how much time I have or how am I doing, and yours would not be to be fantasizing about what you're going to do when you get out of here. That would not be your correct situation and your correct meditation. And he used to say, listening time is only listening time. Driving is only driving time. When you drive, just drive. When you walk, just walk. Anyway, when you breathe, just breathe. You get the message, being just very simply present with what we're doing. He was talking to a group of doctors, and he said, when you leave the hospital and you're driving home, 100% keep driver's mind. If you're talking to your wife and she's telling you something, 100% keep husband's mind. And don't be thinking about the hospital when you're with her. That's not your just now situation. And he called that only going straight. And it sounds sort of simple. It even sounds kind of dry. But when we are doing it, our minds become more like a mirror reflecting what is just here, now. And the more that we can be with what is just here, now, the more oddly fulfilled we feel. It's like being present with your food when you're eating it, if you're really tasting it. And I don't mean, that you have to eat at a snail's pace, but just appreciating the food and not talking on the phone, which is what I do often. I don't know, I guess when I'm home, and I'm alone. Sometimes I like to have company when I'm eating, so I'll call somebody and talk to them. But then I realize I'm not, I'm not with that experience. And what happens is not very satisfying. I want to have more food then afterwards because, I don't know, it just wasn't that fulfilling. And yeah, so devotion to this correct situation, devotion to this present moment, devotion to our situation as it is, keeping our minds as simple and clear and present, moment to moment to moment. This is our practice. And there's a way in which the devotional meets the mindful when we are doing this wholeheartedly, because what happens? What happens to you when you're doing this wholeheartedly? Anybody? What do you feel? Angel. Yeah, yeah. So it doesn't matter which end of the tunnel, because I noticed too that the people who are really chanting and really devoted to Maharaji, the people who are around Ram Dass and who practice, his practice is to simply say, "I am loving awareness," and then to let the "I am" fall away. To start out identifying consciously, "I am loving awareness," and then repeating that almost like a mantra. That's the chant, and then just loving awareness. That's all there is. And if you've ever been in the moment of somebody dying or the moment of a baby being born, that's all there is. There's just a kind of thick, rich atmosphere of presence if you've been in that room. And it's so interesting because in the old days, like in Victorian culture, children were not allowed to know anything about sex. They were not allowed to be present at births. But they always were around when people were dying. They were present at deaths. There was no sense that death, should be hidden from them. And now we're completely reversed. Kids can be present at a birth, but no, not funerals and not people dying. And I just bring this up because if you have a chance to be present with someone who's dying, it's a great, great teaching. It's a teaching of love and devotion and presence. And it's one that in our culture, people can grow to middle age and never even have seen a dead body. We don't revere this. And that's one of the things I loved actually about being in India, is that when somebody dies, they are carried through the streets of the village or the city, and there's some drumming and there's some chanting, there's some reverence. People stop, and there's a sense of reverence for that being who has left their body. So maybe devotion doesn't always have to be a specific explicit practice. I think we can see our devotional side in 1,000 little unprompted, spontaneous acts of kindness that we give and receive on a daily basis. And we can feel, like Angel was saying, we can feel the love that flows from our open hearts. So this is what I want to share with you this morning. And now we have a chance for you to, ask any questions you have about your practice, or offer any insights that you've had. Anything you'd like to share. But we'll ask you to speak into the mic so that it will be heard on the recording. And nobody will know who you are on the recording. And I don't, is this being, oh, okay. It's recording. The second one is live. Okay. No one will know who you are on YouTube either. So, And any time that you offer or ask a question, it's really an act of generosity, because chances are there's other people in the room who are also either struggling with this or wondering about it as well.
Thanks. So I'm wondering if you can offer some insight as to how to be present with feelings of loss of love. So, for instance, being in a breakup.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and that just some absence of something, and so I find it just very difficult to just be with myself in that.
Oh, yeah. First of all, I'm sorry, because a breakup is always painful, and we've all experienced that. And if you haven't experienced that by now, I encourage you to have the experience, because because it's much more shocking if you've never had it than if you're kind of used to it. But I'll just tell you a story quickly that after a breakup that I had, and it was really painful. We had been living together for a number of years. It was really a big relationship. I was so devastated. I felt bereft. I felt like all the love had drained out of my life. When I was alone, it just felt all empty and just bereft. And I went to do a self-retreat at a friend's house near a beach and near Rhode Island. And I was walking on the beach, and there were a lot of round rocks. I remember I was looking at the rocks and walking and being present, doing my practice, and probably crying. And suddenly it dawned on me, wait a minute, all that love that I felt for that person, that was my love. That was my heart. And they left, but they didn't take my heart. It's still here. And it was love that I felt in the context of that person. And so their being gone means that I don't feel that love. But at the same time, the potential and the loving heart is mine. It's yours, Michael. Do you see what I'm saying? It's yours. And right now the heart is sad and hurt, maybe angry, all, the gamut of feelings we go through in a breakup. And so the practice, I'm sorry to say, is to be present with those feelings, because the way out is through. We want to distract ourselves, we want to find somebody who will make us feel pretty or handsome or whatever we are feeling the need for. We want to do anything except feel what we're feeling, because it's so painful. The heart literally hurts sometimes, doesn't it? So that song, Achy Breaky Heart, it's really true. And so it's a paradoxical intervention in the sense that to be with the feelings that are really painful, it feels like, why would anybody do that? But the reason to do that is because you're being with those feelings without all the stories about who said what and who did what, and if only, and if I'd done this, and if I'd been that way, this wouldn't have happened. The mind, it's a form of grieving. The mind just churns those thoughts. But see if you can feel the feeling in your body, the achy, bad, sad, where is it in your body? And see if you can bring that sprinkle that tenderizer on it, which means just some kindness. Like, of course I feel this way. I'm heartbroken. Of course it feels terrible. Of course there's sadness. Of course there's wishes for revenge. Of course there's, all the things that, of course I wanted to go do something destructive to myself or him or her, but, or them. just accepting with some kindness that this too will pass. Because as somebody who has had 2 divorces and more than that many breakups, I can honestly tell you there's more love where that came from. And it might take a while, but in that while, you'll be getting to know yourself and making a new relationship with yourself. And even though that sounds absolutely unappealing right now, it will benefit you in the long run. The other thing that people would say to me that was so uncomforting, but I'm going to say it anyway because it was true. They'd say, "Oh, this will make you more compassionate." And I think, "Oh, I'm already compassionate, okay? Um, I don't need to be more compassionate." But it's true. The more our hearts are tenderized and the more we go through things, it does deepen our compassion. And again, you want love not to be deeper and more compassionate, but at the same time, they do tend to nourish and encourage each other. And just keep coming back, because it helps to be with others. And thank you. Yeah.
Trudy, can you help distinguish between devotion, the devotion you were referring to, as opposed to blind devotion? Is there a devotion that allows for questioning, doubt, or is devotion at the level you're talking about, beyond questioning?
For me, as I said, I'm kind of a rebellious type. It's never beyond question. Because I think it's through questioning that it can deepen. If you won't allow yourself to question, if you just, I have to be devoted, you're just squishing or repressing doubts. Whereas if you allow the doubt to be there and offer it, this is the tricky thing in our meditation. We think that the pleasant states are a good meditation, but the doubts and the feelings of being disappointed or disillusioned or whatever's coming up, those feelings are just as important. They're just as evanescent in the long run as fleeting. But to offer those, devotion can include those feelings, because you're offering them to presence, to mindful awareness, to loving awareness. Do you see does that make sense? Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I don't really think blind devotion is very wise. I mean, unquestioning is a better word than blind, because actually those who are truly blind have other senses that allow them to see in ways that we often don't. Yeah. Sylvia has some.
Thank you. Hi, Trudy.
Hi, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. I wonder when I think of devotion, I feel like I've had a long devotion for a cause for most of my life.
Yes.
And right now I'm in a place of deep transition. It's a long story, but I've lost my house for a hidden case of mold, basically. And I'm not sure where it's going to be my next place where I'm supposed to be as a base. And I'm giving myself the freedom to explore instead of blindly going in a direction that might not be the right one. Mm-hmm. But this place of transition makes me feel less devoted, less motivated to pursue my devotion. And so I was wondering, how does one navigate transition and still keep the sense of devotion, which is life-giving in so many ways.
Yes, it is. I think in a big transition where you're not even sure where you're going to wind up living, and I don't mean whether it's a different apartment or house, but even where geographically you're going to wind up, that's a big transition. And so the devotion needs to be also to you and your own process. And it doesn't mean that your environmental work and what you've been devoted to isn't important anymore. But that lack of enthusiasm right now is because your energy is somewhere else, where it actually needs to be. We have to live somewhere. Whether, even if it's under a bridge, we have to live somewhere. So what's the sadness?
I think it resonates.
Yeah.
But it's also like a deep desire to create something in terms of a living situation that it's not clear. Like, I mean, it's clear in my vision, but it's not clear in terms of the geography and the location. So that's why I was saying there's a sense of freedom, definitely, because the slate is clean and I can explore, but I'm like, where is this place I keep envisioning that is so beautiful and has a sense of connection and has the things we experience here and in other places? I envision this, but I don't know where that is. It's almost like it's in my imagination.
But it's not here yet.
But it's not here yet, and that's sad.
Well, it makes you vulnerable. It's always vulnerable when we are in between like that. You know, it always reminds me, my daughter, when she was little, she loved hermit crabs. We had, among other things, hermit crabs. And hermit crabs are really interesting because they don't have their own shell. They find a shell that they live in, but then as they grow, they outgrow that shell. And then they have to go find a bigger shell. And so there's a period when they have to leave the shell that's too small and then go find the bigger shell, and they're not protected. That's when a bird can swoop down and eat them, or it's a vulnerable time. So, you know,
Beautiful
you just
analogy.
Yeah. I mean, you love nature.
I know, yeah.
So you're just a hermit crab right now.
You're right. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It feels very still and peaceful in here this morning, doesn't it? I feel like people don't even want to break the silence.
Good morning.
Morning, Nick.
I had a Hindu devotional practice back in the 70s and 80s.
Oh, then you know more about this than I do.
Well, you know, it definitely had its ups and downs and its positive and negative side. But there was some really thrilling moments, really outstanding moments, and also at times a lot of confusion with it. And eventually I did leave it. But I also had a childhood experience when I was raised Catholic, when I made my first communion. I mean, the only way I can really put it is, quote, I experienced Jesus.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And I mean, it was such an intense experience of light and love. That even is still with me now.
I can feel it. It gave me shivers when you said that.
Because I was growing up in war-torn Europe and a lot of personal stuff too. So it was like, always a really chaotic and kind of weird experience. And it's really, I think, more devotion and that devotional kind of love to, which now I realize that source is really inside of me as inside of everyone, even
Exactly.
though we often put it outside. It's been a very interesting experience.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for telling us that. And I think that's especially important, like for Michael to hear when you're heartbroken and feeling so far away from light and love, to remember the source really is in our own hearts. It's really here. Yeah, thank you. And it doesn't really matter if it's Jesus or Maharaji or Buddha, or it doesn't matter. Those are intermediaries, you know? Yeah.
It's like ice cream. There's a lot of different flavors.
Yes. I was listening to a talk, a YouTube it's a neuropsychiatrist who was talking about his work with near-death experiences and people who are dying, and he was saying, he was asked, do you think that the experiences that people have that they report are sort of culturally determined? And the answer was yes, of course. You know, the beliefs that we're taught that are in the culture around us determine some of, like you experienced Jesus. Then later in the Hindu practice, I don't know, maybe you experienced Hanuman or somebody else.
Actually, at that point, it was that 15-year-old Indian, this was back in 70, 71, who referred to himself as Guru Maharaji.
Oh, I remember him. He was kind of plump.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember him.
Right.
Sort of round,
Yeah.
young guy. Yeah.
Right. But he just got totally into his ego.
I know. He kind of lost his way.
Yeah, I understand he's kind of come back in different ways, but
Oh, good.
yeah. Well, it is all about light and love and compassion and kindness. More I'm into just being kind and being open and being understanding.
Yeah, and that's how, the Dalai Lama says, my religion is kindness. And
Yeah.
yeah, thank you. How about if we sit some more? Let's just sit together. You don't have to even change your posture if you don't want to. Just let's just be quiet for a few minutes. One thing that I wanted to tell you before we close for this morning is that great British psychoanalyst and pediatrician D.W. Winnicott, who coined the phrase good enough mother, good enough parent, you may have heard that. He also talked about ordinary devotion. That was his phrase, ordinary devotion. And what he was referring to is the ordinary devotion of, say, changing diaper after diaper after diaper, or doing feeding after feeding, preparing meal after meal after meal, whether it's for a child or yourself. The ordinary devotion of activities that we do on a daily basis or many times a day, and we don't think about it. If we're lucky, we're being present while we're doing them. If we're very fortunate, we're being reverently mindful while we do them. But most of us are just doing them most of the time and pretty much lost in thought and hurrying to wherever we're going, even if we don't know where that is. I think it was Gandhi who said something about why moving so fast toward a direction that might be the wrong direction. We've all done that too. But I love that notion of ordinary devotion, just the things that we do to take care of ourselves, to take care of life, to take care of others, and that those count. That it doesn't have to be a guru or a deity or a teacher or really anything or anyone that we would call spiritual, and think, that we make that line between what's spiritual and what isn't. But whatever we do in a spirit of love and devotion, whatever we do, even maybe we feel grumpy while we're doing it, but we do it. We take care of it, whatever the it is. So now is the time when I urge you to take care of your center, to take care of InsightLA, to support us in whatever way you can, and especially if you can, become a monthly supporter. That is really, really helpful to us. I think we should have some perks to being a monthly supporter. Let's do that in 2020. That would be fun. So next week I will be up north at Jack's, and Justine is going to be teaching. Justine Dawson, she's taught here before. She is a teacher who she was trained in the Spirit Rock teacher training that was, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. I'm not sure, but the same one that Will Kabat-Zinn and Gina Sharp and Larry Yang and Kate Leela Wheeler and Temple Smith and a lot of the teachers whose names you may know at Spirit Rock and IMS were in that training, and Justine is just great. So she'll be teaching next week, and then I'll be back the following week. I might be teaching with my friend Jan Suri, who is a teacher of Insight Dialogue. Some of you may have heard of that. It's a paired meditation practice where it's a relational meditation, contemplative practice. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your practice. And I look forward to seeing you next week. If I'm forgetting anything, you'll remind me. Am I supposed to? Women's March next Saturday. I won't be here, but there will be an InsightLA contingent. So please join them.